Hi, I'm Lucy. Welcome back to my shop. Today I want to show you a little bit of technique on how to make a really nice keepsake box. These particular boxes are memory boxes, so it's laser engraved like memories of Dad, and then was able to put in someone's favorite quote. And these make a really special gift for somebody who's lost someone, but they don't necessarily have to be memory boxes. They can be, for jewelry or any type of keepsake items that someone might like to have. So this is a few different stages of the process. And they are all just a simple miter joint box. And the top and bottom are going to be, just simply flush cut. So they're actually fairly simple to make, but by adding some nice splines, in this case Dovetail splines, we're able to make them look like a little bit fancier joinery while still being a relatively simple box. So I hope that you enjoy this video. If you do, please like and subscribe if you want to see some more of my woodworking. Thank you. There are a lot of different ways to make miters, and I've done them on the miter saw or the table saw, but since I'm using primarily my router table here for these boxes, I decided to just put in a 45-degree bit and run them this way. I did it in 3 passes, so basically an 1/8 inch on each pass. This is the final pass on each board. So I'm just going to make a simple tape clamp here. And you want to take your time and really line up the wood in the best possible grain pattern. So sometimes you might be wrapping, if it was a consecutive cut of wood. And then in some of them, I actually just flip the board over so that it would make a really cool V with the grains at the corner. So just lay it out and see whatever is going to look best. Sand off any little imperfections that might affect how the joint's going to come together if you had any tear out from making your miter. I like nice thick tape for this. It works out really well. Once you have that laid out, then you're just going to carefully flip it over. You can pre-finish the inside of the box so that if you get any squeeze out when you're wrapping this up, you can just wipe it away quickly. But since I'm going to be flocking the inside of this box, I'm really not that worried about if there's any squeeze out, so I didn't bother pre-finishing the box here. So, just get the glue evenly spread. And then this is always a satisfying part, just, making it into a box. Apply tape at the corners. And then you just want to assure that it is nice and square. Okay, so I'm going to use the same spline jig that I used when I use my table saw and do basic splines. That spline jig goes over the fence, and there's a lot of videos out there on how to make this. It's extremely simple, but I found that if I just run that same jig just along my router table fence, it works just as well, so I didn't have to make any separate jig. So I'm lining up center here and got the bit to just the right height so that it won't go through the inside of the box, but I'll get as big of dovetail as possible. And so I'm going to get this centered. I'm just going to take nice, slow, even passes. I happened to get the height perfect on these. The last set of boxes I went just a slightly bit too deep, which didn't matter since I was flocking the inside anyway. Here the bit is definitely stopped before I get the rest of the dust down into the dust collection. Now I'm going to mark out and center the next 2, but they will at least end up symmetrical because you're going to just run one side and then the other side from the same setting on the fence. So you can just, decide whatever distance you want it to be. So get everything in place, and then I'm new to this router lift, and so I decided maybe I'll try putting in a little bit bigger collet here, which worked a lot better for dust collection. You'll be able to see because I'm running just under the table dust collector. Now I'm just going to flip the box around for the other side. So again, you really only need 2 fence settings to be able to make all 3. And in my other video where I show you some, 6 splines on something, again, you'll only need 3 settings. So to make the spline insert, I'm going to keep the same setting of my dovetail bit, and I'm just taking a piece of wood that's a little bit thicker than what I need, so thicker than the thickest point of the dovetail, and I'm just going to slowly inch up to just the right amount. So I'm going to take a little bit off of each side, move the fence back just a little, take another pass on each side until I get really close. Then I'll just start doing a pass on one side, if needed, until I get a perfect fit. I rearranged my shop in the middle of making all these boxes and moved where my router table was. So the spline that I'm actually using here is from the first set that I made. If I'm making them, I tend to make extra because the dovetail size itself isn't going to change, and I'm always making a consistent depth of a box, or thickness of the wood for the box. So for this box, I used some dark glue. The first set I didn't have dark glue for, but when I was actually delivering that set of memory boxes, I stopped at a woodworking store and decided, since I'm using walnut, and then some of these I'm going to use Duke splines, that I would see if the dark glue helped to kind of fill any little gaps a little bit. And I actually was very happy with the final product, so I thought it was actually worthwhile to use the dark glue. Don't be afraid to use too much glue. You want a lot of glue on these, again, to help fill in any little imperfections. Occasionally one of the splines might be just slightly too tight of a fit if the board wasn't perfect when you routed it, or if you just were away from the fence a hair while you made those long passes to make the spline. So I always just keep a little piece of sandpaper in case I need to just knock off a little bit of a side to make sure that I get a really nice fit. Now for a couple of the boxes, I added the middle layer as Duke splines just to give it a little bit more character, and I really like that look. It was beautiful. So I'll probably do some with Purple Heart and a couple of varieties in the future. Alright, so you want to trim these off close with either a handsaw or actually used my bandsaw. I lost that footage somehow, but really not exciting. A handsaw, if you have a nice handsaw, works just as well. So once you get them somewhat close, I just took them over to the router table again and used a nice flush trim bit. And the little piece of wood underneath that I'm using is just because with the splines that are still sticking out on the other side, it's not going to make a nice flat surface for that to ride against, and you don't want that flush trim bit gouging in if you're at an angle. So you want to make sure that it's nice and flat. So now that I have 2 sides that I've already flattened, I'm able to just not use that little piece of 1/4 inch anymore. These boxes take a lot of sanding, so I'm not going to show much. I'm sure if you've watched any of my videos, you've seen plenty of sanding. So I just ran these, 120, 220, and 320. One of the wider tops that I was going to resaw to be the top and the bottom had a crack in it, so I ended up cutting that board in half to get rid of the crack, and then I'm going to resaw the skinnier pieces and do a book match top for the box, which ends up really looking very nice. A few passes through the planer and they'll be exactly the same thickness, which will make for a nice glue up. And I have two options for which way I want to book match this. So I lay out that direction and decide that I like this look better. So just add a little bit of glue. Doesn't take a lot of clamp pressure when these are this thin. On thinner boards, I'm more prone to get a little bit of snipe, so I'm going to just wipe off the excess glue and get these as clean and perfectly lined up as I can, because I have no intention of planing them again. So to glue up the box, I'm just going to put down a few thicknesses of tape. Just a little piece of cardboard or something would work as well. Basically, I just want to make sure that I have a slight bit of overhang on both the top and the bottom, well, really all four sides, so that I can flush trim it up at the end. I just don't want to risk there being a spot where the top or the bottom is inset from the box itself. So bad camera angle, but I'm applying a little bit of glue. Since I'm using the walnut for the one edge, I decided to use the dark glue again. It probably really wouldn't make any difference for this application. Everything lined up, I'm going to use a couple nice parallel clamps here. And then I'm going to assure that each corner also has extra clamp strength, because you just want to make sure that there's not any little bit of bowing in this. And this really just is more proof that you can never have too many clamps. Here I'm using a high quality spiral flush trim bit, so I get a very nice cut on the top and the bottom, and doesn't require nearly as much sanding and a lot less risk of tear out. Now for the very stressful part. I think cutting open a box is always a step that everybody holds their breath while they are doing. I want to mark out exactly where I want my cut to be. I'm going to set my blade to be just above the thickness of each side of the box. I don't want to go much higher than that. Alright, here goes nothing. I'm going to take a pass on each side. I like to start on the narrower edge so that when I'm doing my final cut, I have the most contact with the table, less, risk of wobbling. I did grab a little spline that's the same width as my kerf here to just set in the top, just to make sure that I didn't end up squeezing and kind of screw up my positioning. Then if you just take a piece of sandpaper on a flat surface and just, kind of clean this up a little bit, we'll take care of any slight imperfections from where the saw lines may not have lined up perfectly. On my little laser engraver, this is where I, am able to add a little bit of personal detail, and I'll put a link to a little video that I have on this very inexpensive laser. All right, now for the fun part, we're just going to add several coats of lacquer. I really like this little plastic Lazy Susan thing because it gives a nice way to move the project around instead of me trying to move around to each angle. Makes for quick work for small objects like this. The little frames for the inside of the box to go around the quotes are relatively tricky, but they definitely add a lot of nice detail. Basically, the biggest reason why I put a frame in there is so that I have something to be able to flock around. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to get a crisp line. And so this one I'm going to make out of the Padauk. It's for one of the boxes that has that Padauk accent. So I put a little bit of wax down so that the CA glue won't stick to my surface, because I'm going to use a little CA glue and then a little activator. Applying just a little bit of CA glue, little dot on each side. And then I'm going to get this into position, line it all up. And I'm just going to spray a little activator over it, enough's able to seep in that it causes you to get a really quick bond with that CA glue. And I'm making sure, even though I waxed it, that I keep moving it a little bit just to assure that nothing tries to stick to the work surface. I've definitely been there, done that. Now with all small parts, the super fun part is trying to get them sanded adequately. So I found there's no other way to do this well than just with a piece of sandpaper and doing it by hand. Now I'm going to hit this with a few coats of lacquer, and you can see that it's really going to be a nice, beautiful contrast to the walnut on the inside of the box. Then I'm just going to use CA glue to attach that to the inside. I apparently didn't film that step. But for flocking these boxes, I found that I actually do better if I don't tape the tops off. I'm able to just, go up like you're cutting in a nice line up the edge, and then I don't risk getting anything underneath a little bit of tape. So I'm just going to apply a nice thin coat of the flocking glue. Big thing to make sure is that you get the glue to the point that none of it's going to run. You're not going to get those strings, so just make sure over the top of the glue that you spin it around, and that's a mistake that I've made before. I'm wearing an N99 respirator for this. This flocking stuff does not seem like something I'd want to get in my lungs. And then I have a fan and filter going next to it, which you'll see is going to end up really full of the flocking stuff by the time I'm done, but worth it if it doesn't end up in my lungs. You really can't overflock this. It'll, you'll end up with extra at the end that you can reclaim anyway. Even for this part that has the framed in quote, I found that it's easier to not try to tape it off, just be really careful and use your brush and just cut in around it. to apply a little bit of hardware on the box, and for me, I've just found that if I use some clamps, just make sure that I'm keeping all four sides really nice and flush. And this setup works pretty well. There's probably better ideas out there. Putting the hardware on is one of my least favorite steps. I do not get along well with those tiny little screws. Then make sure you take the time to find the center point. And the hardware really is the final step. So once you get that in place, then you really have a beautiful gift to be able to give someone. So I hope that you enjoyed this. Like and subscribe for more, and I hope that you're able to make something special for someone.